Good evening and a very, very warm welcome to you. Wherever you may be, you are tuning in to the Football Out West show. It's episode 22 and we are live here on Facebook. And my name is Tonci Prusac. I'm one half of tonight's co-hosting team. And right next to me is over there actually, is my co-host Craig Filer. Craig, a very, very warm welcome to you, mate. What a massive show we've got tonight. And stop muting yourself. He's done it again. He keeps muting himself.
Sorry, guys. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Tonch. It is very warm. The kids are cold. The wife's cold. They got a heating on full blast, and I'm absolutely roasting my socks off here in the office. So, but yes, we've got a fantastic show lined up for everybody this evening.
No, it's so big. It's just massively massive. Tonight we're going to have well, who have we got on tonight?
Who have we got? So we start off. We've got. How do we announce him? Probably the player that scored the greatest goal in Australian soccer history to reach the 2006 World Cup after 31 years. I think it was. The legend that is JOHN ALOISI.
Special guest. He's a member of the Golden Generation, and I tell you what, he was the compere of that Zoom roundtable discussion that has eventually led to some major changes at Football Federation Australia level, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the news desk. Who else is coming on, mate?
We've got the current assistant for the women's national team, or the Matildas as they're most commonly known, Mr. IVAN JOLIC, who will be joining us from Sydney. And we've spoken to Josip yesterday, and he's a very interesting character. And Ivan, and he's going to have a lot to say about football and what's required from many different angles.
Yeah, look, mate, what I'm really excited about both of our guests tonight. We often hear that old thing that, the players, especially some of our well-known players of yesteryear, they're not involved in the sport any longer. Well, with JOHN ALOISI and IVAN JOLIC, both of those are not only just still involved in it, but they're heavily involved in it. That's the thing. They're really, really massively involved. So they've both played at NSL level. They both played at A-League level, or were involved in A-League. They've been involved as coaches, as players, and involved as administrators even. So if anyone is going to talk about the state of football in Australia at the moment, it's these two gentlemen coming up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot to say from both. Hopefully, we get a lot of interaction from our listeners tonight, and we'll have some big news towards the end of the show regarding the coming weeks as well.
Oh, does it get any bigger? Like, seriously, does it get any bigger? I'm so excited. I want to say now who that person is, but I'm not going to, because it's next week is going to be potentially a very eventful show. But tonight, before we get to next week, let's worry about tonight. And without further ado, straight into the news desk, mate. The news desk. What is or isn't happening in the world of football at the moment?
Yeah, so look, I think let's start off with the Football Federation here in Victoria, and I suppose the plans to restart the football season as it is. And I think we all know now, we all watch the news, and I think the sort of date that everybody has in mind at the moment is the 11th of May, when the government will reassess what the COVID crisis is. And Scott Morrison's come out this week and said, and I quote, "The federal government wanted to get all Australians backing recreational sport as soon as we can. And the National Cabinet of State and Territory leaders agreed to develop principles for sport and recreation to get consistency across the country." Now, today, we've found out that the Football Federation in Northern Territories has relaxed their codes, and I think they're looking to start back in the next week or so with their soccer, and I know they're really excited about that in the territory. And with that in mind, Tonch, I understand that this week there was a meeting of the Federation Committee, this week or last week, and they've put together some preliminary dates on when the season. I'm not sure whether this is common knowledge, whether it's out there in the broad spectrum of things, but
it's a scoop. It's a scoop right here in the Football Outwear Show.
Yeah. So look, these are only guidelines and they're only time frames, so let's not take it as gospel. But the community juniors and NPL juniors, that's all of them, will commence training dependent on the result of the government's 11th of May decision. We'll start training between the 12th and the 15th of May. Training for 3 weeks, and then a competition start date of the 6th or the 7th of June 2020.
Now that's the best case scenario, but have a think of this. That's only 2 weeks away. That's a fortnight away.
Correct. And that's why, if you go back and listen to the news, certainly in Victoria, Daniel Andrews wants 100,000 tested over the next 2 weeks. That the decision on whether community football starts back in 2 weeks' time will really depend on what happens with those results, I think.
Yeah.
So...
Do you think, though, mate, do you think... Sorry, I was going to say, do you think, though, in your opinion, Craig, with more testing, I mean, you're talking about 100,000 tests or something like that, massive increase on what's been done now. Because so many people are probably haven't got the symptoms and have got it, who knows, maybe you've got it, maybe I've got it, and we don't know about it. Although it'd be very hard because I haven't stepped foot out of the bloody house for about 3 weeks. Is there going to be more instances of people testing positive, and will that then throw a little bit of a spanner in the works?
Yeah, potentially, Tonci, and that's, I think that's one of the reasons why they want to do the testing. And you have to take your hats off to them. Everybody wants to get back out and do what we all love. Everybody wants to get back to normality and whatever normal will look like after this. But we've also got to remember that, as you said, there are going to be cases that nobody knows of at the moment. The COVID app that's come out is going to help identify, who's had it, who's been in contact, and over 3.5 million people have downloaded the app so far. So look, let's take it as a positive. The news is that community juniors and NPL juniors will look to start back on the 6th of June. Senior community and senior NPL, that's 18s, 20s, and all seniors, will have a 4-week lead-up program. Training to start on the 16th, 17th of May, and potentially a window of between the 12th of June and the 3rd of July for a season start. Again, we don't know what that season looks like. We don't know whether it's going to be a full season, a part season. And the Doherty Cup, that's going to continue, and that's going to start on the 6th of June as well. So, look, some really interesting information. If that is correct, then, we can, and everything goes right, we can expect to be back on the parks very soon.
Well, it'll be very interesting, and I'm going to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works, and I'm going to say that it will be a lot easier for the state league clubs, the state league comps, than it will be for the NPL, because if they do all of a sudden turn around and say, yep, we're going to proceed, conditions apply, and those conditions are games have to be played behind closed doors, the NPL clubs won't be able to hack it. They'll be financially ruined. They won't be able to cover the costs, unless the federation, both at a local and a state and national level, come to the party. I don't know if I can see that happening, though.
No, we spoke off air, Tonci, and you mentioned you've read a report today on Croatia, on what is the second division in Croatia, which would be equivalent to the NPL here. So give us a bit of an insight into what's happening there.
Well, this was just earlier today. I read an article where in Croatia, as in other parts of Europe, they're saying the first division, the second division will be able to start training early next month, looking at June, July, early June, mid-June. Coming back, remembering they're coming into their summer season as well, If you listen to all the rhetoric about coronavirus not actually being able to survive in direct sunlight and heat and all that kind of stuff, so in a sense they'd be a little bit more advantageous. But the talk is that it may involve games being played behind closed doors. Okay, fine. That's good, all good with the professional leagues, the first divisions and Premier Leagues and what you're not. But then you're going into the semi-amateur/amateur leagues further down the tree. And in Croatia, all 16 Croatian second division clubs wrote to the federation agreeing that they would rather that the season not be restarted because it would mean financial doom and gloom, because they live off gate takings, bar takings, very much like what the NPL clubs around Australia do. And if they were forced to play behind closed doors, they would obviously have to pay for all of the expenses, including player payments, referees, travel, etc. Unless the federation can come back and guarantee them that they will not be out of pocket, they would rather not play at all and rather prepare for next season.
Yeah,
Can
look,
I see that happening with NPL clubs here in Victoria?
No, I can't. But what I can see is NPL. Look, what I can see, or what I'd like to see, is that NPL clubs now put a lid on silly spending. And that not just, we're not talking just NPL clubs. We're talking football in general. Whether you're down in State League 5, where we know this just silly money going around, that has to stop. Clubs are not going to be able to afford to pay those wages going forward. We're already in a situation where nobody knows whether clubs will survive and come out the other side of this. We've spoken about that on the show before. We've already spoken about, clubs and, like our big supporters and sponsors, George Cross, who, if their function rooms, their bistro at George's on Vista is not open, they're not getting any funds and revenue coming through. So how are they going to be able to play their players? So look, what I'd like to see out of it, and I was speaking to a president just yesterday, actually last evening. And he's hoping that the players come back and really realise that, for the sake of football, for the sake of, $100, $200, what is, that they forego that $200 to make sure that the club is stable and can continue to operate. Well, if they don't, then we're going to be in worse state than we are now.
Look, at the end of the day, I guess this is where people will, you'll find out. We'll find out exactly, are people in it for the sport? Is the federation in it for the sport? Are the clubs in it for the sport? Are the players themselves, the fans, the spectators, the sponsors, are they actually in it for the sport? This is where the sponsors are going to be so important. But also the fans, the members. If at NPL level, the games will be televised. There's no doubt about that. Why can't fans then start paying virtual admission money back to the club? $10 per fan. Go back to the club to cover that. That's an option. Maybe that's an option that can be rolled out by clubs themselves. We would love to hear from the clubs. We would love to hear, if you're involved with your club, if you're a president or a committee member of a state league, an NPL club, send in your questions, your comments, your suggestions in the comment section. Be a part of this show, folks, because we've tried so hard over the last 3-4 weeks, Craig, to deliver some absolutely A-class guests on here. And we've got John Aloisi very, very shortly going to be coming on. We want to hear now from you, the punters. Numbers are good, as they have been for the last 4 weeks. And why wouldn't they be? When you've got Željko Kalac, Craig Moore, Rob Sherman, the list goes on. And tonight, John Aloisi. Next week will be the big one.
Yeah, it will. But let's get through this week first, and we've got a great show lined up for the listeners, and we're thoroughly going to enjoy the next hour and 15, 20 minutes, or hour and 40, whatever it takes tonight. But it's going to be a good show. Absolutely.
On that note, we're going to take a little bit of a break. When we return, a little secret here. This was a pre-recorded interview just a couple of hours earlier with Golden Generation member and ex-Socceroo great John Aloisi, simply because he's got Optus Sport media commitments coming up as we speak. So it is a pre-recorded interview, but it's very, very relevant because it was only done a couple of hours ago. So don't go away. Stay back, because it's going to be massive, massive, massive. Okay, massive. a Football Out West show live on Facebook here. Craig, our next guest, mate, they don't come bigger than this gentleman. He's arguably scored the most famous goal in Australian football history, and it was probably more to the point, it was something that he was involved in very, very recently on Optus Sport that has really turned the wheels of change in Australian football. And it is an absolute pleasure to have this gentleman on.
It is, and just before we do get on there, I think it'll be remiss of me to say there that it's probably not the best goal ever in history, Tonci, but it's certainly probably the most important goal in Australia's soccer history. So at least, well, I would imagine that John would like it to be the best goal in history, but I'm sure it's not. But look, we're really glad and thankful for giving up his time this evening to come on the show, and we welcome JOHN ALOISI.
Thanks, guys.
That means that if JOHN ALOISI...
Well, as you can see, there's some footage. Just sit back and take in one of the most historic nights of Australian football.
Are you sure?
I'm trying to do my maths.
4-2.
I can
Who
hardly
wins it for us? John.
Here's ALOISI for a place in the World Cup.
For us.
He scored! Australia have done it!
Come on!
JOHN ALOISI, the Confederations Cup hero, has done it in the biggest game of all.
Come on, Australia! Johnny Warren!
At last, at long last, 31 years, 4 months and 24 days have passed since Australia ended its campaign at the 74 World Cup. And now, finally, belatedly, wonderfully and joyfully, Australia is back on the biggest stage.
And we're also back as well. And I tell you what, I can never tire of watching that footage. And I'm sure our special guest tonight is in much the same vein. Very, very warm welcome to you, JOHN ALOISI. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. And just to let all the listeners out there know, I did not tell you to put that on, okay? You're not I think I said, oh, why not? I don't mind listening to it or seeing it again.
Listen, I remember that back from the UK, John, and I obviously remember you playing back in the days for Portsmouth, Coventry, and I think that's the fastest I think I've ever seen you run when you took your shirt off.
I get a lot of people saying they've never seen you run so much and so fast. And,
Very good.
It was an unbelievable moment, of course, but it was just for everyone in general because, you know, like Simon Hill commentating there, we're back on the biggest stage of all, the World Cup, and for a lot of us, it was our final opportunity, and more so for every football lover and everyone that followed the Socceroo. It's a long time coming, and we had some great sides that just missed out, and we were fortunate to be involved in the side that got there, and not only got there, we actually performed really well at the World Cup, so it was a pleasure to be part of that squad.
John, on the night, obviously the jubilation, the celebration, no one knew what was going to happen afterwards, or to the extent that history would be made. But in that joy, in that jubilation, in that celebration, was your mind just fixed on that night then, or was already thoughts of playing at the World Cup on the greatest stage on earth? Was that entering your mind at that point in time?
Not at that point in time, because of course it was a dream of mine and all the other players to play at the World Cup, and you know, watch World Cup, and we've actually never seen Australia there because a lot of us weren't born in '74, so it was you know, it was something that was always in our minds to finally get to play in the World Cup. But in that moment there, and this goes back to my childhood, you know, I would practice in the backyard with my brother Ross, and you know, we were football lovers, and we had a passion for the game, and it didn't matter, you know, what Adelaide City supporters, but you know, I remember Chris Calamps scoring an important goal for Sydney Olympic, and he took off his top and ran around the pitch like a madman, and you know, I was doing that in the backyard, and I think all those emotions come out, and that's probably the reason why I took off my top. It wasn't planned, but it was something that, you know, I'm sure that everyone everyone in that stadium that was watching had the same emotion as what we did out there.
Yeah, and it was something else, and I know just seeing the pictures again there, it'll just remind everybody again this evening of how important soccer is or football soccer is here in Australia. And we're just looking here on the group that actually got you when you got to the World Cup, what actually greeted you in the World Cup. So I think Brazil, Australia, Croatia, and Japan. That's some group.
Yeah, it was a tough group, and we knew it was going to be tough because Japan were, probably the best team in Asia. They had some quality players. They had a really good side, so we knew that was going to be tough. We didn't know a lot about them back then because we weren't in the Asian Confederation. The first game, Brazil just crept past Croatia 1-0. We knew that Croatia was very strong. They were one of the toughest European nations going around at that time. And Brazil were reigning world champions. So we knew that we were up against it, but we had a belief that we could actually match it against anyone. And we got through a tough group, and then everyone knows what happened against Italy. We took the world champions, the eventual world champions, right to the wire, and disappointed that we ended up losing that game. But it just shows that how strong our side was and the players that we had back then that were playing at a very high level. And this is why I think you got me on the show. How do we start producing those sorts of players again? And, we had that discussion the other night on Optus Sport. It was a Zoom sort of chat discussion, and you see that the players that we had on, and all of them from that World Cup, are still as passionate about the game as what they were back then when they were playing the game. And just recently, a group of us have got on a group chat, and we're trying to organise a group called the Golden Generation that can discuss these issues that we're having, and not only issues, how do we take the game forward? And I haven't spoken to Lucas Mill for a long time, and Lucas is now involved, and we've got the other boys that were on the other night, plus Darren Burgess, Silko Callas, Ron Smith is also involved, who was heavily involved in our upbringing in terms of the AIS, and we're just getting together. How can we help the game?
Now, John, we've got the still from that Optus Zoom in question, where we've got Josip Skoko, Craig Moore, who was also a guest on our show about 3 weeks ago, Mark Schwarzer, Vince Grella, and Mark Viduka, of course. Yeah. On the night, and it's interesting that you were involved with that historic penalty kick against Uruguay and set the wheels in motion for an historic transformation of Australian football. In many ways, that Zoom roundtable that night, which was riveting viewing, by the way, had set the wheels in motion for quite a revolutionary change, or we hope it will be, in Australian football. And since then, Football Federation Australia have come up with a starting 11, as they're calling it, a think tank consisting of some of the highest names in Australian football, both from the men's and women's. Mate, could this be a focal point in the transformation of Australian football, in your eyes?
Well, that's what we're hoping for, because we know as a group we're much more powerful in our messaging and our voice, and as individuals, it's a lot harder to actually create that wave and that talk about. You saw the other night, it was mainly just us discussing and showing how passionate we are about the game, and we had no idea the risk that it was used, and we had no idea that everyone was thinking the same way as us. We're just saying this is what we feel, and it's great to hear that the majority of football lovers and followers out there are feeling the same way. And what the FFA has done in putting the starting 11 together is great. There's a lot of knowledge in that room, in that starting 11. Let's hope that they listen, because that will be obviously the important part. Let's hope that they're open to not what we can do at grassroots level. I think even, in terms of the A-League, we know at the moment, this is a moment that we can actually try and restructure these things, because where the A-League is at a crossroads. We know that. There's a lot of clubs that have done a lot of good things in the A-League. But, I think now it's time to actually get clubs that have been around for 60 odd years and get them involved and try and create something that has got the whole of football together. And we unite as one, because at the moment it's too fragmented. We spoke the other night about our governance, and we know that that's a bit fragmented, but it also, just in terms of our grassroots to the top, is very disjointed. So let's hope that we can actually do something about it.
Looks like we've lost Craig there. Hello, Craig.
Very sorry, guys. I muted myself so I wouldn't get any interference. Sorry.
It was your fault. It wasn't my fault. There you go.
Yeah, my fault. Look, I think in a perverse kind of way, the COVID-19 crisis that's come out is going to hopefully be a bit of a godsend to football, because it will allow, or should allow, us to start thinking about, what change. You just brought up there the A-League, and I'm in total agreement. I think it is at a crossroads, John. I think maybe it's now becoming a little dour and a little bit damp, and probably time for a bit of a change in how it operates and what it does. But more so for me, it's about how do we generate the next generation of 2006 Australian footballers? That's the key for me, because I see some very, very good talented players in the A-League, and I see some fantastic young talented players, whether it's playing for the Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City, or whether it's playing locally in NPL football. How do we get these talented youngsters into some kind of system that allows them to be playing against the best week in, week out, and allow them to develop the same way as you guys did with Ron Smith at the AIS?
Yeah, look, I agree with you that eventually it should be that the best are playing against the best, and there's no scores that are sort of blown out. And I think that in Victoria, you've actually just started a new system. I think it's gone for a year now in terms of first you're playing with zones, and then we go to another level, and then eventually it's the best against the best, which I think it's a good idea. I heard that it worked pretty well this season. My issue about it is that it should be something that's very similar all over Australia. That we should all be on the same page and pushing, because the important years are definitely between 12 and 16 in terms of playing enough football games, having enough quality training sessions. We all know the issues in terms of the infrastructure, and you coach at grassroots level at clubs, and you know that the facilities are okay, but there's not enough pitches, for the amount of kids that are playing. So, what can we do about that? Instead of training on a quarter of a pitch or a half a pitch, how can we end up that the kids are training on a full pitch? What can we do in terms of getting government funding? How can the government help in putting sort of outdoor football courts like they've got in certain countries that kids can just go kick the ball around every day and all day? How can we reconnect our grassroots A-League? Now, at the moment, the A-League is actually there's only 20 or less than 20% of grassroots football that really connect to the A-League. Now, how can we grow that? Now, I believe that we need to align ourselves all together in terms of A-League aligning the NPL. I'm a big believer in actually making, let's have a first and second division, A-League, B-League, whatever you want to call it. Let's give the opportunity to the clubs that have been around for 60 odd years of actually rejoining the top level. And I think that's a way of actually grabbing everyone's attention and also reconnecting with grassroots football, because we all know there's some clubs that have done an amazing job in the A-League, but the connection's still not there with a lot of clubs. I think reconnecting with the past is a good thing.
Now, on Tuesday night on our sister program, the Geelong Region Soccer Show, ex-Croatian international Joey Didlica was really praising the new NPL junior structure in Victoria. And Craig, you're heavily involved both at North Geelong, where Joey's involved, and in the NPL junior structure. And one of the things that Joey was very adamant about this new structure is that it is creating a similar to what they used to have back in the day, a Super League structure where the best kids were playing against the best in the state. John, what's your take on creating, I guess, probably competitions that currently don't exist with the A-League? So whether it's a hybrid national youth league being played in the summer that provides the best 16 to 20-year-olds in Australia with top quality competition. Do we need to now start thinking outside the square, or maybe even, as you said, returning back to what was once upon a time a winning formula? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, times have obviously changed, so you have to keep up with times. You can't just go back, and say, yeah, keep working the NSL, because the old NSL had its own issues. So we have to look at what worked with that and what worked with the A-League, and actually looking that we can actually do something and restructure it. With what Joey's saying with the NPL, that's what I was meaning before, that, what ends up happening is that you end up having a great competition, that they end up having also a selection process that the kids end up playing as the best. You end up selecting state teams. You could end up having zonal areas that have these summer youth leagues, and then all of a sudden, instead of playing 30 games, you might be playing 40 games this year, or a little bit more. And also, you're actually getting selected for something in terms of your zone, or you're getting extra training sessions, better players, not just at club level, and then all of a sudden you get selected for a state team, and then you go to national. I think that works really well, because you've got something to strive for. You're proud to represent your state. And then from there, the talent ID is a lot easier, getting the best players all in one area.
Very good point. Very good point. Craig?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, John, because I've written down one of the things to speak about was that, and I am involved within the NPL structure down at North Geelong, as Tonci said, and I'm involved with the under-16s. And for me, Football Victoria this year have done something different, where they've actually gone out and given kids more opportunities to play football, which means more time for the coaches to be involved with the players, which means more time on the field coaching them, which is fantastic. And I think all up, it's 33 games. And how you've got it down in Victoria, as you probably know, John, is you've got effectively 3 leagues. You've got the teams that do very well and win their games are playing in League One, then your mid-table, and then your bottom table. But the reality is, you're in those leagues based on your performances and based on the team that you're in and the level that you're at. And I think that's really good for football, because you will then get your top 6 teams, which are in the first division, which would effectively be the better players all playing against each other on a regular basis, which can only be good for development purposes, rather than playing somebody who's in the bottom league winning 13-0 and actually nobody wins out of that. But I think, from that, could there be an opportunity then? You may have touched it. It was a bit of a dodgy line, but you may have touched it, where I think then you play your 33 leagues, 33 games, so your 11 qualification games, then your 22 league games. And then what you do is you're getting clubs involved, and it could be the coaches from each club nominate a particular player from a game that you've played. They then go into what I would see as an NPL Victoria rep team at that particular age group. So you might have 20 players of what I see the best players in those teams. In a rep team, they go away for a camp somewhere. It could be in Victoria for a few weeks and train. And then there's a national competition where you've got Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, South Australia, all in one. So it's a little bit like the nationals that they have now, but in a better format for me. Would that work? Is that something that maybe we could consider, we could look at?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's something definitely to consider. And this is, I like Victoria is probably not as big as a state as Queensland in terms of the size. So, it might work differently in certain states, but it should still be of a similar model. And this one governance, easier to implement through the whole of Australia. And I think that way there, that you're getting your quality games in and a lot of quality football, and also you'll actually end up. And we had nationals that we represented our state, and we couldn't wait to play against Victoria. And I grew up in South Australia, and our rivalry was against Victoria. New South Wales always had a strong team, the WA, and it meant something. I love the idea of, you get promoted, relegated, if you want to say, that the best teams are in NPL 1, then if the levels go down, it gives you something to strive for. If you want to get promoted, if you want to play against the best. And that way there, you're not only your individual players, but your teams and your coaches are trying to improve. And I think that if we see after a year or two, and even 3 years, if it's not working, then try something different. I don't think you have to stick to something if it's not working. But at the moment, I'm hearing good feedback from the NPL in Victoria, and so it seems like that it is working, and that's something that we should keep on rolling out.
Yeah, look, it is working, John, and I think they've split the league into 3 this year. So you got an NPL, LPL 1, NPL 2, but it also has its downside because there's only 22 games. So you've got senior players only playing 22 games a season. So again, that can't be good for the development. So you've got the juniors up to age from 13 to 16s playing 33 games, but you've got the seniors only playing 22. So there's a real mishmatch of what's important, because at the end of the day, even the under 20s and the under 18s will only be playing 22 games. That can't be good for football.
No, that's not good. I think, especially when you start to get to that top level, and you're talking about NPL, even A-League, I think that it's not enough games when you're talking about 22. I think that it should be at least between 30 and 40 games, and that's why I'm saying, with the restructure of the A-League, you can actually restructure the NPL setup, because our NPL juniors, between 7 and 8, it looks like they're getting that right. They're still at senior level, and in say 17, 18, we still haven't got that right yet. And I think by having an A-League and then even a B-League with current NPL teams involved in, and you can have a Northern Division, Southern Division, eventually promotion relegation from that, and then you could even have a third tier, which are the NPL clubs that don't want to actually get promoted, that they just want to keep on running their football clubs and play in the third tier, more in a regional area. So get more games in. The more games with the better quality of players you're going to start to produce.
Now, John, you touched on before that, Queensland being such a big state compared to some of the other states, and Australia as a whole is a massive, massive country. And I guess you've had first-hand experience when you're coaching up at Brisbane Roar. That distance, the cost factor, because a lot of critics of the B League or the second-tier competition are saying precisely that the issue here would be the cost factor. In your opinion, is that, obviously money is always going to be a problem, but to what extent would that be a inhibiting factor in developing a second-tier national competition?
Yeah, it's definitely a factor, because a lot of clubs say it's not viable for them to actually run a second tier. Now, this is where you need to have, obviously, sponsorship dollars, get clubs working to a level that is generating enough money, and they're able to sustain their football club in terms of income. And I think with this anyway, with the virus, it's been a leveler with A-League and NPL clubs, because a lot of A-League clubs have lost a lot of money. They're talking about salaries going down and whatever else. But I feel that if you create a northern and southern division, and then you say a promotion, relegation, and whatever else, if you package it really well, then you can actually take it to a broadcaster that we might be interested in that. Because at the moment, if you go to a broadcaster, Fox do pull out, which everyone's saying that they probably will. If you just go with the A-League, I don't think there's going to be money involved. But if you go with an A-League and a second tier that's cover most of Australia, all of a sudden there'll be money that they might be interested, and they'll generate money, and we'll be the only code that would have that, because every other code in Australia don't have that. So we've got a point of difference. So it's the way that you can package it, it's the way that you can present it to broadcasters, and it's the way that you can deliver it. Because at the end of the day, what we need to deliver is a good product. And at the moment, our product's not good enough for broadcasters to be interested in.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the second tier with promotion and relegation, John, is something that is really could be a real positive. You played in the UK, you know what going from the Championship or Division 1 as it was into Division 2 into Division 1, it's the biggest game in football. You know, you tell me that nobody in the UK gets excited about the playoffs. It's unbelievable, you know, and that feeling of whether you're a supporter of one of those teams that makes the playoffs, and then you go through all that. You've played your season, you worked your heart off for the season, and then you get to the playoffs, and you get to the final. You've got one game. Granted, it's the biggest. I think it's the biggest pound note or dollar figure in world football. But you know, that's how important football is in that part of the world, and you can see how much it means to people. That would be fantastic here in Australia, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I think that we're all about that. We want our national teams to do well. So for our national teams, and I'm talking about Socceroo, Matildas, Olyroos, and the rest, that to actually start to compete on the world stage and do really well. Now, for that to happen, we need to start producing better players, and players that can go over to Europe and UK and actually deal with the pressures of that. Now, at the moment, we've got a league. Don't get relegated. It doesn't matter if you finish bottom. You know, you more than likely you're going to get another opportunity, either the club that you ended up finishing bottom with, or another club, because it's just like a merry-go-round at the moment with players. And if you do have a promotion relegation, it's actually hardening players up ready for when they do go overseas, because eventually we want them to go play at the highest level possible. Now, at the moment, we've only got 2 players in the Premier League. And so we're not producing those sort of players. Now, I remember, you know, not only the promotion side of things, where you're saying such a good game of the season that, you know, everyone follows, there's so much money involved. I remember playing in relegation battles, and they are hard. There's so much on the line, not only for the players, the club, but the actual city that you're playing in, and because there's so much that they can lose do go down. So, you know, having that, it also creates a passion, and it creates, people wanting to go to that game because it's something important. So if we can create that here and not just allow it to go along as it's going along, and try and create a passion for the game again, I think that will be a massive, massive boost for us.
John, in my hand, I've got a copy of what the PFA produced last year, report, Culture Amplifies Talent, and it said building a framework for the golden generations. We hear that word a lot at the moment, culture. Josip Skoko, who was one of those members of the roundtable Zoom conference on Optus Sport, has also said in an article that's just been published today by Optus Sport, where he's saying culture is such a thing that needs to be emphasised. We had Children Carlos, another generation a few weeks back on Football Out West, saying pretty much the same thing. And he went so fast as to say that when he went to Europe, he was faced with a real dog-eat-dog environment. I think that's the word he used, Craig.
Yep.
You've been there, John. You've experienced that. Is that maybe that one element right at the top, at the elite level, that's missing from our game? Not talking about the grassroots, the community level, but the elite, a real dog-eat-dog, no holds barred type of a culture. Is that what's missing in Australian football?
Just before you answer that, John, sorry to butt in there, guys. Just, you know, I've made a note here of the players that, you know, John talked about, you know, players going abroad and making sure that they're capable of playing in those environments, of, as John said, where he played in relegation. You just go through some of the list here: Schwarzer, Robbie Slater, John himself, Viduka, Kewell, Bosnich, Lucas Neal, Lazaridis, Moore, Emerton, Cahill, Jedinak. they've all been brought up in that, what I class as that golden era of football. We've got 2 players. Australia have 2 players now playing in the Premier League. I've just named off 12 or 13 there that were top players playing in the top league, one of the top leagues in Europe, at a real tough time in football.
Yeah, look, we can go on. The list will probably be larger if it's ongoing. You know, what we did have back then, we had players that were mentally strong and physically very strong and technically pretty good. I think now, technically, because of the coaching, and I believe it is getting a lot better in Australia, you know, technically we're producing pretty good players that physically we've dropped off and mentally we've dropped off because they're not mentally hardened, and that's what you're getting at. And it was, and I can say, you know, Spider Galaxy, dog is dog, it was ruthless over there. You know, I remember my first ever time I went over to Belgium on trial for 2 weeks. Not one of the players spoke to me until I signed, and when I signed, they started to speak a little bit to me, and then eventually, you know, you make your way in. But they would treat you like crap, and you had to get through it. There was no other way. You had to make sure, and these were your own teammates, let alone opposition players. But then, you know, you've got your issues with clubs sometimes, and I'm not agreeing with it, but not paying, you know, on time and all these things. They actually, they're things that you have to get through to actually get to the top. All of the players that you mentioned have got stories upon stories of hardships they had to deal with to get to the top level. But that's what actually made us strong, because we had to go through it. We went through it. And then when, you know, the pressure cooker came along in terms of playing in big games, and, you know, a World Cup game or whatever, we were used to it. So we weren't afraid of anything. And that's just through experiences.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we have a lot to blame for that now, John. And we can't just go around and say that it's the coaching and it's the philosophy or it's the whatever that looks like. I think parents of certainly of my age are really important in how we've brought up kids over the last 10 or 15 years. Kids don't have to do anything now. Mum and dad will do everything for them. And you know, from my time back playing football, you know, my mum and dad would run everywhere for me, but they'd make me work for it. Whereas now I think, you know, the mindset of people are far weaker. I do some one-on-one coaches with some players. And I have to say, you know, some of their mindset and willingness to put in the hard yards is terrible, but they want to play at the highest level. And I'm saying, kids, you got no chance. You know, you haven't got that hardened, you know, attitude to, you have to work extremely hard to be the very best you can. You don't see Ronaldo and Messi giving up when they were 30 because they played some, you know, look at Ronaldo now. Look at the shape on him for a 36-year-old, you know, still playing at the highest level. That takes dedication, that takes ambition, that takes the will and the want. And I think we've, unfortunately, as parents, and I'll put myself in that category where, you know, we've just given kids everything. They don't move out of their bedrooms now. They're playing on their PS4s, whereas we used to be out in the road with jumpers as goalposts, as we used to call it, playing in mud, playing on streets, playing in car parks, and we'd move out the way if a car came and then get back onto playing football again. That's all stopped.
Yeah, look, I understand that, and I get it. There's also the schooling now. There's a certain way of actually teaching kids and bringing up kids, and parents, you know, are listening. I won't go away from it. I actually was pretty full as a kid as well in terms of, you know, compared to my parents. But what I did have and what the majority of those players had, they had a real passion for the game. You know, I grew up with playing all my juniors at Adelaide City, and my dream was to play for Adelaide City with that first team. So my passion and desire to play there, and then once I sort of got close, it was more, you know, I wanted to play in the best leagues in Europe. So all the knockdowns and everything was not going to actually stop me from actually going and trying my best and working hard enough to get to the top, because that was what I wanted to do. That was my passion. Now, I think create that passion, and we talk about just the same culture and create that culture. I think even the way that parents are bringing up their kids, you know, the players will get through it because they, you know, I hadn't lived away from home before I I went overseas and a little bit at the AIS, but that was a lot closer. And all of a sudden, I'm in a foreign country in a French-speaking place that my English wasn't that good, let alone my French. And all of a sudden, that you're having to deal with issues that you've never dealt with. But because I wanted to play overseas and at that level, you dealt with it. So if we can create that passion and that hunger back again, I think that will help us produce more players.
John, the biggest issue, I guess, now is we simply want to get back out on the field. Doesn't matter if it's in the A-League stadiums, the NPL grounds, or down at community level. So the sooner this coronavirus crisis finishes, the better. On the other side of this, will football change? Let's look into the crystal ball in your eyes. Will football change, and how will it change?
Yeah, it's a good question. It has to change here in Australia, that's for sure. We're discussing we want to be better, and we want the game to grow to the potential that it can. And look, we discussed it earlier that no one likes not watching football, not being able to play football, a sport that we love and we've life. Actually try and help it and get better. So you look at this negative time at the moment as an opportunity for us. In terms of European football, it will change. Now, it's how? I don't know. Is the sort of money that's been going around still going to be there? I'm unsure, but because I know this is going to hit financially a lot of different companies and different sports. But in terms of developing players over in Europe and the rest of the world, they'll still develop players. They'll still have their leagues. They'll still be, playing at the highest level. That's why we can't sit on our heels and get left behind.
If there was one thing, John, that we need to change, just one thing that we need to change here in Australia, what would it be?
Oh, that's
I have put you on the spot now.
There's many things that we need to change, and I know that it's a really hard one because what's the most important thing at the moment that we need to change? And I think that the A-League is the most important thing. We know we need to produce players. We know that we need to get grassroots back at a level. We know that our talent ID needs to be better. But and we probably, it's a sport that we need to grow from the bottom up. But I think if we get this A-League right, this will help all the other things that we've been discussing. So, I'm a firm believer in the transfer system locally, because that would not only help the clubs at the top, but also go down to the clubs in the NPL and help them. I think financially that will help. And, I'm all for opening the salary cap. I know quite a few are against that. And why hinder clubs that want to keep on growing? Why put a limit on that? We don't have to follow the other sports because that they've got a salary cap. We're an international sport. And probably came out recently and said about the salary cap. So I think that there's two major things that we can actually affect straight away in doing that. Now, clubs will realise how much they can spend or can't spend. So it doesn't mean that they're going to overspend the salary cap on. They'll realise and bring in financial fair play. The likes of the City Group won't be able to go and spend huge amounts of money compared to the rest. It will still be quite level, and the clubs that have do a good job and are financially stable will be able to spend more money. Yes, that's the way it should be. So I think there's two things that we could actually accept straight away.
Fantastic, John. I really appreciate your time today. One last question before you do go. You mentioned Chris Kalantzis in the old NSL, and a question for you on a personal level. Who had the best abs in the old NSL? Was it JOHN ALOISI, Chris Kalantzis, or John Markovski?
You mean a young John Markovski?
Yeah.
But I can tell you now, out of the left footers that you just, well, the players you mentioned, the best left foot was John Marcos.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
I remember watching him play. I was very young at that stage. He was actually down in Adelaide. He was playing for Sunshine George Cross, and he hit a ball from I reckon it was about 40 metres out, and it hit the crossbar, and the first came back over his head. That's how hard he hit it. I'd never seen someone hit a ball so hard in my life. It was, he was only 15 at that stage. So yeah, John Marcos' left foot, what a wand that was.
Yeah, now you mentioned that we did speak with Caroline Springs George Cross, formerly known as Sunshine George Cross, one of our major sponsors. And just last week we had their president, Mark Sultana, on the show telling us how the old Chaplain Reserve is being demolished as we speak, I suppose. And him, Paul Trimboli, these are other kids that were 16, 15, 16 at the time, getting a taste of senior football in the old NSL. We'd love to see that happening in the A-League, and I'm sure we will see that in the not too distant future. Then we'll see some exciting youngsters coming up through the ranks. John, once again, thank you very much for your time and wishing you all the very best with your endeavours at Optus Sport, who knows, may be a big player on the Australian football broadcasting scene in the not too distant future.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Good on you. That was JOHN ALOISI, member of the Golden Generation, and former Socceroo great who is still actively involved in the sport. Fantastic interview, wasn't it, Craig?
Great interview. It's unfortunate we couldn't get him on the show live due to the situation with Optus Sports, but as a viewer, but great insight into his thoughts around development and what needs to change. And again, it's I spoke about it last week. If you still haven't had the opportunity to watch the Optus Sports show with the 6 ex-pros, it's definitely worth a watch. It's an hour and 50 minutes, and it is unbelievable TV. And it just shows, I suppose, what can happen when you get a number of people with the same thoughts around what needs to happen, of what actually changes. And we only look at, that show off the back of that, of what's happened with the starting 11. And I was under the impression last night that the Socceroos, the old Socceroos, which John touched on there, were on a conference call last evening. So it'll be interesting to see what they've come up with over the last 24 hours and a week that's going to make a difference. And let's hope they can.
Welcome back to the Football Out West show. It's what a fantastic interview that was. It was an incredibly insightful interview. Unfortunately, the audio was a little bit poor. We really couldn't help that much, unfortunately. Just the wonders of technology. It's fantastic, Craig, but unfortunately, sometimes, particularly the audio issue seems to go. But having said that, it almost went for about 45 minutes, and it was really very interesting, very good insight, and he had some fantastic pearls of wisdom. And Craig has muted himself again. He keeps doing that.
He's a very knowledgeable guy. Is John? He knows his football. He's played at the highest level. And yes, the sound was okay. It wasn't brilliant, but we look at the comments down the side of the screen here, and I think it came over well enough. I think the people were intrigued in what he had to say. And look, it is a shame that we couldn't get him on live, but Optus Sports, I suppose, come first over little old Football Out West show. So we just thank him for giving up his time this afternoon for an hour for us to have a good chat with him. And he has said that any time we want him back on, that he's more than willing to jump back on with us, which is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to have current Matildas coach. He's been a coach educator for many a time. Very highly renowned in that department in this country, and he's also a former star of the old National Soccer League with the Melbourne Knights, IVAN JOLIC. He'll be coming on very, very shortly. We hope to get him on. He was in the green room, but he just seems to have ducked out. So hopefully we're going to get him back on. But in the meantime, we've got a few things happening here on the comments section. We've got. Here we go. Michelle Harboglu says, "Happy birthday, Peter Couchy." Peter is often very, very heavily involved in our comment section. So happy birthday to Peter.
Yeah, happy birthday, Pete.
Thanks, Michelle Harboglu. And Simon Camilleri says, "Johnny's audio wasn't that great." That's right, Simon. That's why we apologise. we actually said the audio wasn't that good, and unfortunately, he was actually, I think the reception wasn't very good where he was. But we do our best, and we try and do our best, and certainly we had some fantastic insights into that. Now, we're going to take a little bit of a break, Craig, and in the meantime, we're going to try and get IVAN JOLIC on the line. But we've got a couple of words from our sponsors, so don't go away. You're on Football Out West Show live here on the Facebook. It is episode number 22, and we will be back with IVAN JOLIC very, very shortly.
CMF Soccer Coaching offers tailor-made personal and small group development coaching throughout the western suburbs of Melbourne and Greater Geelong. With over 20 years of experience working and playing within the academy systems of several professional clubs in both the UK and Australia, CMF Soccer Coaching has a player-first philosophy to ensure that all sessions are tailored around the individual's needs at all times. Under the guidance of UEFA and AFC qualified coaches, we specialise in one-on-one and small group coaching sessions, offering European-style academy-level training with the sole aim of improving players' technical and game understanding in a safe, friendly environment. If you are new to the game or a seasoned campaigner looking for some additional coaching, then we can help. To find out more about what we can offer and how we can help you improve your game, visit our Facebook or Instagram pages for more information, or simply email us at cmfsoccercoaching@gmail.com.
Welcome back to the Football Out West Show. It's a pleasure. We've got our next guest on. He is in the green room. We're going to bring him on straight away. And it is none other than the assistant coach of the Matildas, a former NSL great and a highly renowned coaching educator here in the country, IVAN JOLIC. IVAN, welcome to the Football Out West Show. Great to have you on board.
Pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Now, mate, I'm not sure if you managed to get much of JOHN ALOISI's interview there. Went for 45 minutes. A lot of interesting things to say there. And one of the things that you really got to admire about people like John and yourself, I put you in the same boat, is that John was involved in the old NSL, was involved in the A-League, and continues to be involved through media. But yourself as well, you've been involved as a player in the old NSL, as a coach at several clubs in the A-League, and now you're involved with the national women's setup. Mate, you've seen a lot of changes over the last 15 years. And from a very, very objective point of view, how would you assess the last 15 years in Australian football?
Well, I think it's fair to say that there's been significant growth in a lot of areas, Tonci, you know. So I think, you know, like we've hosted an Asian Cup. We've won an Asian Cup on home soil. You know, it was an Australian coach who led us to, you know, one of our greatest achievements in football. You know, the A-League, you know, the protagonists will say, oh, you know, it isn't as good as the old league and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, objectively, you know, up until before the coronavirus, Foxtel was pouring the best part of $57 million a year into the A-League. Now, that's growth, and that's got to be a positive for our game, you know, and we've got to that point over the last 15 odd years. Now, I'm not saying that could have been achieved without the foundations that the NSL laid and those people, absolutely not. But, you know, to think that the game hasn't grown and hasn't improved, I think is false. I really do. Because otherwise, who'd be investing, you know, $57 million? We look at participation rates. You know, participation rates are absolutely skyrocketing. So the growth of the game is there. You know, which other code has the growth in the female side of the game? You know, all of a sudden we have gone in the last 15 years to a limited pathway to females, to one where there's a clearly defined pathway for girls all the way through to international football. You know, we now have, you know, we took a World Cup, we took the Matildas last year to the World Cup where we were very, very competitive. You know, we have global stars. You know, Sam Kerr's now at Chelsea, Caitlin Ford's at Arsenal. 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. So I think there's a fair bit of negativity around, and sometimes we need to, you know, the leaders of our game currently need to understand where that anger's coming from and understand their context. But in reality, the game has grown and improved, and it's been a pretty big journey for the game, and a positive one in that for the last 15 years.
Craig? Have you muted yourself again?
Goodbye, error number 3 tonight.
That's hey. 3 strikes, you're out. You keep doing it tonight. What are you doing?
Unbelievable. And you're right there, Ivan. You know, women's football, girls' football. You know, when I arrived 7 years ago, it was very limited. The amount of available football for girls, and we will touch on the women's side of it because it's imperative that we do with us having the Matildas assistant coach on. And you know, what has been I suppose before we go into, you know, football and what's wrong and what we can change from a Matildas point of view, what is the future there for the Matildas? What do you see coming through the systems from 14, 15, 16s right up through to the national squad?
I think the thing that I've seen and being involved in youth football on the boys' side into the A-League and the challenges our players have there, and then I had a stint as the young Socceroos coach, so I saw some of our younger players and the better ones at that. What transpired through Asia and some of the limitations that we had. Now that I've gone over to the Matildas, I can honestly say we're tracking in a similar way. Like I've got some concerns about our programs, our investment on the girls' side compared to what European and Asian countries would be investing in their female programs. And to be perfectly honest, I think the females are tracking very much in line with where the men and the boys currently are. We just might be lagging a few years behind. We've got probably a bit of a golden generation with this lot, but what's coming through, I think is concerning, and we really do need to, get some government funding, government intervention in really growing and investing that side of the pathway.
Go on, Craig.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, obviously you've mentioned the Asia there, and they do have a massive influence on football and on this side of the world, and they obviously put a lot of money into their football side of it, and you've just touched on it there. Something needs to change. It can't all be AFL, and because all I see on Fox Sports or any sports channel at the moment is AFL, rugby league. That's it. There's a little bit about soccer in there somewhere, or basketball, or whatever that might look like. So, things need to change from a government perspective on what's important in the sport, and more money needs to be ploughed into football. There was a comment on that Josip Skoko made. I think it might have been today on Optus Sport around. There's 100 AFL pitches to one football pitch, or some silly numbers. So that tells you where the infrastructure or the game is thought of in Australia. And unless that changes, and again, all these things are predominantly linked. Unless the government come in and say we're going to support soccer in Australia, I can guarantee you we're going to be having the same conversations in 5-10 years time again, because you just said the golden generation of girls at the moment. Sam Kerr playing in Chelsea. You've got Joe coaching the Arsenal side. What happens after this? What happens then? It's going to be exactly the same situation as where the men are.
Oh, it definitely does. And like I said, you just have a look at the alarm bells were ringing with the recent, young Matildas and their performances at the Asian Cup. The results were disappointing. And ultimately it's because the funding that the Asian countries and the investment they're making in these programs far outweighs what we are. And you're right, Craig. It really does come down to, the government needs to invest in a code where there's international exposure. Which other code will provide female athletes the opportunity to go and represent their country on a world stage at a World Cup? So we have the largest participation, and, the funding's disproportionately lower. And, I'm not here to rant politically, but that's not my expertise. But, even the layman can see it. But I do have, like I said, grave concerns about what's happening around the world, because at the World Cup, the progress the European nations had made in the best part of 6 to 12 months was incredible. It was incredible. And a lot of that's built out of, one, investment, and two, the other thing we've discussed, and it's close to my heart, is they've got a football culture. And we've got to start to not only have the financial backing, but we've got to start to build a football culture here. Have our kids desperate to represent our Matildas and our Socceroos. And that desperation just isn't there at the moment.
Ivan, culture. You go on about culture. Now, this is a big thing, and it's something that John Aloisi touched on in the previous interview. It's something that Željko Kalac mentioned, made a big deal out of it right on this show a few weeks ago. When the NSL folded, I guess you were involved in the NSL, certainly towards the tail end of the NSL, and you've been involved in the A-League. When the NSL folded, a lot of it was talked about lack of resources, not having the finance. The Frank Lowy era was heralded in and all that. But it's interesting, majority of those clubs, the ethnic clubs, are still around today. In Victoria, the clubs like South Melbourne, Melbourne Knights, Heidelberg Green Gully, George Cross, Preston Lions, they're all still around, and the same applies in other places. The clubs that didn't so much have that history, that didn't so much have that culture, the Northern Spirits, the Parramatta Powers, Carlton FC, they all folded. Now, heaven forbid, with Foxtel possibly pulling out and whatnot, are we on the brink of major collapse of the A-League and the clubs, the A-League clubs, if that was to happen? Or is there enough of a culture in Australian football at the moment for these clubs to be able to weather the storm going into the next era, whatever that may be?
Look, I think the game will survive, and ultimately where it resets, that's the anxiety and that's the unknown at the moment. There's a lot of negativity around the Fox deal. I spoke to some people today who were of the opinion that, AFL and rugby league, the NRL, they'll take a hit. Foxtel's trying to, reduce their financial burden through those two cards, who take a fair bit of the money out of Foxtel coffers, and that football will have an existence. One thing we need to understand is that football's the global game. And there is a football culture in Australia that I think needs to be a bit more expanded and connected. and have a bit more of a voice. Now, that won't dissipate. You can't just, go and buy a Melbourne Victory membership and, if there's a reduced, TV revenue and the salary cap reduces and, you don't just stop supporting your club. I think we need to do a lot more to build the tribalism, because I think that's what drives clubs overseas. Active support is part of the theatre. And I'm not here to condone pyrotechnics and all of that, but ultimately that's our sport. And for all too long, I think the one thing we've tried to do is we've tried to mimic AFL and NRL and try to actually take fans away from those codes. I'll be honest, I don't need the AFL supporters to jump codes. We don't need them. If they want to, that's great, but we shouldn't be actively forming a strategy to go and take those fans. What we need to do is facilitate the fans that we have. Get the fans that aren't coming to an A-League game or to their NPL club, get them back into their club environment, get them back into the community, build a passion. The clubs like Tonci, you're involved with North Geelong. North Geelong's built on not finances, it's built on a passion, a community, a form of tribalism, a bit of an us against them mentality.
Absolutely.
That's what drives our clubs. It's a culture.
It's a culture.
Well,
And ultimately people go there for dinner. They go with their grandparents. There's grandkids and they see that club means something to them. And our game's built on that. And that's where you build a culture. And I think that's what we need to do, and the game won't be broke. Let's be honest, the best part of 24 months ago, there was a queue lining up for 2 licenses to expand the league, the length of the Flemington Strait. Everyone wanted to be in it. Collectively, I think the 2 successful bidders paid $30 million. Like, the game ain't dead and buried. So, we've got to get out of this negativity. Granted, we have some issues. We have some issues. But which business don't have issues?
I was going to say, Victor Brincat, and our comments have been going really crazy tonight. It's absolutely great to see. There's a lot of passion out there, a lot of people wanting to have their bit. But Victor Brincat, who's very, very heavily involved with Caroline Springs, George Cross, the historian, now he's got a great comment. I really want to emphasise his comment that Victor says. The A-League is a far better product than the old NSL, but it can still be much better if we can get every football fan behind the game. We have far too much division, and this must be healed. Now, that goes hand in hand with what you just said, Ivan. We don't need the AFL fans. We don't need the NRL fans. We've got almost 2 million football players in this country. They need to be more engaged. There needs to be more of that tribalism. There needs to be more of that, I guess, friendly rivalry and that uniqueness in our sport. And that's missing, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, it is, and maybe we've tried to mimic other sports within our landscape because that's the landscape we operate in. But I think what we've found over the journey is that, no, we are unique. We are a unique sporting code in Australia, and I think part of the uniqueness is the attraction and our strength. And I don't think we need to, attract fans to A-League games by having, for example, Star Wars round. I don't want the fan that comes to the A-League because of Star Wars mimics. I'll be honest. What we do want is people coming to the West Sydney Wanderers because of the red and, the red and black block, right? We want them. You want that. That's our game. Melbourne Victories, North and South End in their heyday, that was worth an A-League fan coming to watch their entertainment. The fact that our Melbourne Victory fans sit on one end of the stadium and Melbourne City fans at the other end, that's normal in our code. That's what we want. Yes, we want the behaviour to be, social, and by all means it will be. But, if AFL wants to have their fans interspersed between each other, that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's right. We should believe in our own product, grow our own product, and integrate what we do have into a great game.
But you talk about culture just now, Ivan. I just want to touch on one thing that bugs the hell out of me is finances within football, whether it's a State League 5 club or top end NPL club. Okay, how can we create cultures at clubs whereby people want to stay at that club for a longevity as they used to, We had a lad on Tonci on the sister show on Geelong Soccer Show the other day who was came through the North Geelong Warriors, set up as a junior, left for a year to go and experience men's football at Corio Soccer Club, then has went back to North Geelong and has been an ever-present since. And I think Tonci asked him the question, what's the future? I think he's 23, 24 years old now.
Anthony Barnabas from North Geelong,
yeah. And he said, look, I have no intention, as a kid growing up, all I wanted to do was put the red, white and blue on of North Geelong Football Soccer Club. He said, and I've got that. Why would I want to go anywhere else? Now, that's not the norm now, unfortunately. And I think, it comes down to who's going to give me an extra $50. Then I'll go there, and then somebody else is going to come and give me. How do we get rid of that? Or is this now the perfect opportunity that those financial headaches that people have had over the last number of years with, mercenaries going around taking money out of people's pocket, is that now going to stop because of what's happened?
Well, look, who knows? And ultimately, I think it's up to the club administrators and the heads of the club to actually define what they stand for. What does I don't think mercenaries will ever not exist in any form of life. Ultimately, corporates are competing for talent day in, day out. But some corporations, there's loyalty at those corporations and those businesses, and part of it is that sense of belonging, the sense that you can value add to the value add proposition for yourself's high. You emotionally connect, and the values of the environment resonate with you. Like when I was growing up, I was out at Melbourne Knights and St Albans, and both of those clubs resonated with my family. I went there; it was my people. We had some commonalities, and all I ever wanted to do was represent St Albans in the first instance, and hopefully get an opportunity to play at the Melbourne Knights. I was never going to leave St Albans to go and play at another Victorian Premier League club. I only left St Albans to go and play in the NSL. But it's because there was a sense of belonging. And again, it comes down to the culture of the club. And I wanted to be part of that culture. In terms of clubs and their desire to go and win a trophy and that, the egos will get in the way of everything. Like that's, if people want to pay for that, let them be. But that's that short-sightedness. And I think one way we can, help clubs develop an understanding of who they are is to introduce a transfer system. Give them a reason to develop players. At the moment, what's my existence? If I'm at St Albans, my existence is for what? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to develop? I've got no incentive to develop a player. Let's build the things that drive the football economy. And then people can work out their own strategy to benefit from that. But there needs to be a transfer system.
Correct. Yeah.
Can
absolutely.
you see that happening? Can you see that happening, Ivan, in the next 12 to 18 months in Australian football?
Well, look, I'm not privy to what happens, within the four walls at the FFA. That being said, I've had, some dealings with the new CEO, James Johnson, and one thing I can categorically say is he's a football person. He understands football. He understands football culture. He understands belonging to a club, playing football and coming through a grassroots club and playing at the top. So I think there's some benefits of having someone like him there. And if you would ask me, do I realistically think there'll be a transfer system? I think there will be. I think everyone understands that we need to have one. We need to incentivise player development. And if for example, North Geelong, could develop a player and sell him to Melbourne Victory, for example, for $100,000, let me tell you, that would change the strategy of that football club.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And we've spoken about that for a number of weeks on there. And there's a few people that I'm surprised haven't commented on it yet, but it's something that we've been pushing for the last couple of weeks. Is this transfer fee? Because you're right. What incentive is there for a club to develop a lad from 6 years old to 16 for him to just walk away from the club? They've developed him for those 10 years with good, bad, or indifferent, but allowing that kid to walk away with nothing.
Yeah, it's madness. I worked in the manufacturing industry, and let me tell you, if someone came in and said, can you produce this piece of, whatever, at the end of the machine, and at the end of the machine, he just picks it up and takes it away, and you as the manufacturer got nothing, you wouldn't give it to him.
Well, let's just put it into context. If you've got a young NPL player, and again, we can touch on fees and what that looks like, and that's another discussion for another night. But let's just say an NPL player, and it starts from 6 years old, and let's just say he plays $2,000 a year, and he's at that club for 10 years. That's $20,000 invested in that player somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
All right, for him to walk away for nothing, it's not right. It's not right.
No, it's not.
And you're right. If a Victory or it doesn't even have to be a pro club, it could be a top NPL comes in and says, I want that player, because it would make a massive difference to some of these clubs.
It would. It'd actually, you talk about players and mercenaries just coming in. Well, if you had talent, you wouldn't sign him on a 1-year deal. You'd actually sign him on a longer term contract.
Because you're gonna, if somebody wants him, they've got to buy him.
Because that's
pay him out the contract,
and you're happy to invest that money and risk your investment because you back yourself and your development systems and all of your processes in to get a return on your investment. So I think I really do think that a basic transfer system like it operates in the rest of the world will solve a few of the issues we currently have.
Ivan, in order for a transfer system to be feasible, would it almost simultaneously, would you need to either alter or completely do away with the salary cap in the A-League?
Well, look, I suppose you sort of go back and you sort of try and understand, well, why is the salary cap in the first place? So I always say you've got to understand the context. So the context of bringing in the salary cap was to provide newer clubs and young businesses the opportunity to consolidate themselves from a business point of view and their finances. And then with the view that a salary cap will always also allow for some equalisation. Well, we can honestly say that the equalisation hasn't happened, right? Because the Central Coast Mariners have finished last or thereabouts for the X amount of years. And if anything, having been at the Central Coast Mariners and been involved and immersed myself in that football club, a salary cap actually bred mediocrity throughout the organisation.
There you go. There you go.
And
Something that we've all known.
And you know what I mean, from staff, from their commercial acumen, from their strategic thinking, it was all how could I say, disguised by the salary cap, right? Because at the end of the day, all around the world, where there's an open market in any form of business, the smaller guy can get to the top through being different, through thinking, strategically, through having innovative ideas. And that's what we should be promoting, because that's the way the business world operates. That's how we operate. Right?
Ivan,
the world operates like that.
There's a lot of love out there for you in Facebook land. George Gero says Ivan is one of the best out there, intelligent and genuine. Was super lucky to have him as a course presenter in the early days of my coaching journey. Has positively influenced my coaching. Paul Bulsutil says, talking so much sense, Ivan. Give back to clubs that produce quality players. Miles Mitrevsky says, spot on, lads, it must happen. There's a lot of people out there, that can see it plain as day. And now we've finally got a CEO who's a football man. We're going to hope certainly that football is going to turn in the right direction. I want to get back to the culture side of things. Now, you've had your involvement at the elite side of the junior Socceroos, I suppose. You've also been involved and currently are involved with the women's side of it. Looking at both those elements, something that we spoke with JOHN ALOISI earlier today and Jelko Kalac was that real dog-eat-dog type of world that existed in Europe when they went to Europe to play. At that level of our Socceroos and Matildas, is the intensity, is that real desire for win at all costs prevalent, or is there that sort of that mediocrity that probably exists in the A-League?
I can honestly say that I've only seen that players and staff at that level who have a burning desire to succeed. To get to that level, Tonci, you have to have some mentality traits above and beyond the average player or average staff member. And let me tell you that isn't breed mediocrity at that level because you wouldn't survive in that environment. The
Great to hear.
Matildas,
Great to
the
hear.
Matildas are an unbelievably competitive bunch of ladies. They drive each other at training, and when I crossed over from the men's side to the female side, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the intensity and with the many winning mentality they brought to everything they do. And it's
Were you
interesting.
expecting that, or as you say, you're pleasantly surprised? Were you expecting something differently?
Well, no, I've never been exposed to female sport, so you build your own perceptions, and my perception that I based before I got in there was probably a little incorrect because you don't want to be around the table tennis table before meals. You know what I mean? Like they want to win that too.
Brilliant.
So it's on for young and old. But look, international athletes they get to that level because of a certain mentality, and let me tell you, it ain't mediocrity.
And there was once upon a time that was the real Australian spirit. Maybe in eras gone by where we weren't as skillful, where we weren't as professional. Dare I say, we were tough as nails. We were the real, the old Anzac spirit. That was the thing that everyone knew us by. And now, though, as you said, over the last 15 years, we have improved technically. We have improved skill-wise. And this is something else I want to touch on. Over the last 15 years, you've been heavily involved in coach education. We're not going to ask George Gero, who was on last week, actually.
That's his love child, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I must have passed him.
Yeah, must have. But actually, speaking of George, he was very, very, very good last week, very insightful. But we're not talking about George. We're talking about you, Ivan. What's your take on the current level of coaching or coaches in Australian football?
Yeah, I think it cops a pretty bad rap on occasions. The way coach education works, and this is what happened in any country, is once we started and formed a coach education pathway, everyone needed to come through that. So the first people that come through that are naturally very experienced football people, ex-players, coaches who had been coaching for years but then wanted to get their badges. Now, what happens is in Australia, we don't have a depth of football people like other nations. Ours is finite, and if anything, it's a little shallow because we're spread over AFL, NRL. So what's transpired in recent times is a lot of, or the vast majority of football people, those who have come through the game and been involved in the game for 20, 30 years, they've got their badges and moved on. Now we're getting a lot of mums and dads or new coaches coming into the sport. We've seen an explosion in participation rates, and all of a sudden we've diluted our talent. It's normal. So it would be unfair to say it's because of coach education. It would be unfair to say because the coaches aren't good enough. Well, they're just new. They're just on the start of their journey, But I remember doing a C license, and it was a great C license. We had Josip Skoko, Joey Didalika, Andrew Marth, you name it, mate. We had a 10 into, Fabian Cantalupo, mate. I had about 7 or 8 ex-Socceroos internationals in the room. Now I do a C license or a B license in Sydney, 7 or 8 years on. It's mum and dad coaches. It's people who are new to the game. Yeah. You can't blame them. They're getting involved because they want to coach their kids and provide this explosion in participation, provide those kids an opportunity to be coached. Granted, the coaching level might be a bit lower, but it's not their fault. It's not the coach education's fault. The curriculum hasn't really changed. It's just they don't bring a level of experience to the training field or to the courses that previous cohorts did.
Is the demographics a big part of that as well?
It is, Craig. It really is.
Demographics is coming into Australia now, and it's you look at it, whether it's the Chinese or they're not Indian, they're not a football background.
No.
So all of a sudden they're coming into a country now that, and you said it's not their fault. So we have to try and educate those guys to become better. Correct?
And they are. They're totally right. And they're on a really steep learning curve. Now, what about the explosion of women's football or girls' football and all of our mums, who just want to get involved in the game? like we need to protect them, right? And
Absolutely.
that being said, I think the coaching courses need to be a little more agile in addressing the fact that we do have, a certain type of candidate coming onto the course now. It's not an ex-Socceroo, it's not an ex-Matilda. It is a mum and dad. And I think, and I speak to the coach education manager, Sean, a fair bit, and Frosty about this, like we need to accommodate them. And instead of, maybe giving them a guided discovery, path, maybe these guys just need to be told, deliver this. And these
Frosty's actually doing mine at the moment. So, he will be once he's back into work.
We better say all nice things about him. Just like George said nice things about Ivan, you better say nice things about Frosty. Craig.
Yeah, he's a good and he's a good lad.
Now, we've gone well and truly into extra time. The referee's looking at his whistle. Unfortunately, he's going to blow a full time very, very shortly. Ivan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on board. And I tell you what, I think a lot of our viewers tonight will agree if we were to get you on in a not too distant future again, and particularly to talk about both women's football and coaching development, because we touched on some absolute gold items of or topics tonight. Would love to have you back on again very, very soon.
Yeah, it'd be great to get on. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and thanks to all the listeners.
Yeah, no, I think I was going to actually say the same thing, because it's flown by tonight. Can't believe we've been on for an hour and almost 20 minutes, and the conversation's been very, very good, top quality. And look, if we can get you back on in a couple of weeks, mate, and have a chat around what Tonci was speaking about, that would be fantastic.
Definitely love to, and if I can send a quick cheerio to my mates in Melbourne who I haven't spoken to in years.
It's not George, is it? Just let's
no,
get it clear.
Not George. But
George is not going to be mentioned, no.
If I didn't say hello to all of the lads at Wednesday nights, they'll absolutely kill me when I do actually get down there. So go the Wednesday nights.
Good on you, mate. Good on the Wednesday nights, even though it is a Thursday night here on the Football Out West show. Thank you once again, Ivan. All the very, very best, mate.
Thanks a lot, boys, and good luck with it.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll be in touch in a couple of days, mate. And
that was Ivan Jolic, and that was an absolutely fantastic interview. John Aloisi hogged all the minutes tonight, but he was great as well. But mate, the time has arrived now where we've got to announce who our big guest is for next week, and it is a massive one. Craig. I'm going to let you do all the fun and the announcing.
Yeah, well, we had him on last week's show. It's George Gero. No, it's not George Gero.
No,
he's not coming on again. It's definitely not. We've had enough of George Gero tonight. So, who we got on next week? So next week's show, guys, we've got the CEO of the Football Federation, Peter Filopoulos, who'll be our guest next week. There will also be one other, but I'm waiting on confirmation on that early next week, and we'll announce that when we know for definite. I was hoping to know this evening. I've had a text message, and it's unfortunately we got to wait till next week to announce that one. But rest assured, it's a huge coup for us on the Football Out West show. So we'll come back to you as quick as we can. But we've got Peter Filopoulos next Thursday on the show. Please get your questions ready on everything to do with football Victoria, and more importantly, when's the bloody season going to start?
Yeah, CEO of Football Victoria, Peter Filopoulos, appearing on next week's show, Thursday, May the 7th. On May the 11th is a massive day, because the Victorian State Government is going to reassess all of these restrictions to do with the coronavirus. We will probably in a week's time have an even better indication of when we are likely to come back. But in the meantime, it's going to be a massive show. There's going to be lots and lots of questions, and we need you to send us those questions in
email.
By email. And Craig, give us the email address of the Football Out West show.
Yeah, send them to all the questions, guys, in, and we'll review them before we put them into Peter next week and our other guest. Send them through to footballoutwest@gmail.com. That's footballoutwest@gmail.com.
We will be making another announcement later tonight And we will be having that same thing. Send in all your questions via email. It's going to be a massive show. It's going to be an incredibly big show. Peter is going to be really interesting in more ways than one. But we're also hoping to get another blockbuster a guest on, if not next week, the week after. But do not miss it. Do not miss next week's show here on the Football Out West News Facebook page. It's going to be massive. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of tonight's show. We have been going for an amazing amount of time, and we thank you for your patience. Good night, and all the very best.
Good night.